Your Thursday forecast, a hot one, sunny skies, afternoon highs around 91 with a light southerly wind. On Thursday night, mostly clear, lows in the lower 60s. Friday, increasing clouds, still warm though, afternoon highs in the upper 80s. Friday night, chance of showers and storms, mostly cloudy with a low of 58. On Saturday, cooler, mostly cloudy, chance of showers and storms, a high of 66. From BlueRidgeLife.com, I'm forecaster Tommy Stafford. Now back to Joe Thomas in the morning.
Thomas in the morning. Thank you for joining in, letting us do our thing here with you on YouTube and Rumble while we await the FCC approvals on licenses and things like that. And, you know, it's actually a good reminder that sometimes when we have theoretical opinions and analysis of things, sometimes it's good to have a real world connection to them. Lots to get into this morning. Chris Horner, our friend from the Government Accountability and Oversight Group, there is a great piece in the Wall Street Journal. Wayne Cruz from the Competitive Enterprise Institute is going to join us. He's got an artificial intelligence Bill of Rights. Will it be like the 3 laws? That's for the Heinlein fans, the Asimov fans, the 3 laws of robotics. Also, we will get into this in greater abstract, but now everyone is starting to ask a quick question in Albemarle County. So you will be less transparent with me, but you want more of my money in taxes. So we'll get into that. One of my classmates from Bayside High School has a come-to-Jesus moment, maybe, and that's where we'll jump. Oh, and alliteratively, the FASAFA fail and the Fed faint on student loans. But as we watch what's going on on our college campuses, let's go to Anahita Jafari, who's done some very nice reporting on this program as well. But she was dispatched to the University of Virginia grounds to cover the protests that are continuing, as far as I can tell, at the UVA grounds regarding the Hamas, the pro-Hamas protesters there. As we watch around the country, people are continuing to do this. And one of the questions I have to ask is, when did we stop being a people that were tolerant of people who didn't agree with them? Because that's part and parcel of what you're finding in these pro-Palestinian protests is okay for me but not for thee. Here's Anita's report, a quick clip of the University of Virginia Police Chief Tim Longo and his comments to the protesters yesterday afternoon. All right, so that was the police chief who was telling the protesters that it was getting time to go, and that if you were there in violation of student policy, that they would have to leave. And I think the audio is back now. Okay, we had an audio issue there with it. So this is Chief Longo addressing the protesters on grounds yesterday.
And to address the issue of what I'm saying. You're able to do that, right? So what I need is context. Right. Understand we walk through after getting right. Right. And we come to some consensus on some, we do others. Yeah. We agree on one thing, like safety first. Right. Helping all bring the students. Sanctity human life, not in a particular order, but we're here for safety. Right. But when we're present and there's a blatant violation of policy, I have to address it. And ask to address the issue.
All right, so here's the question. They are still there, and that is in blatant violation of university policy. University of Virginia is, just like the city of Charlottesville during the good old days of the Occupy Wall Street movement, appeasing, which, as we know through history, is always the best way to deal with protesters and those who seek to cause unrest, is you give them what they want and then they stop causing civil unrest, right? And there is addressments to these things, and one of the main points here, and it's unfortunate that we're at this point with these pro-Hamas protesters. My classmate from Bayside High School, Eric Adams, who you may also know from the city of New York, he's their mayor, held a press conference yesterday in which he pointed to outside agitators messing with our children, is the statement he used. Now, you could sit there and point fingers, or you could reach out and say, finally, you're getting it. This has been the point all along, and perhaps, just perhaps, we should see a world where the influence of these outside agitators in our schools is now being highlighted for all to see. It's been laid bare. You see what it's being done. So let's get the outside agitators out of our schools, away from our kids, and just go back to teaching them reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's pretty straightforward. But the sad part of all this, as we watch Louisa County here in Central Virginia cut funding to the local community college over pro-Hamas bias in class studies, is that you're just going to, as the appeasers do, get more of this idea of oppressed groups. And what the modern American leftist has done is he's planted a field full of seeds where we misunderstand, and I'm trying to be kind, what oppression is. And this goes back, oh my God, he's going to talk about the Great Society again. But when Lyndon Johnson talked about a society based on abundance and liberty, well, do I have liberty to do whatever the hell I want? No, I don't, because I don't have any money. So I'm therefore oppressed. You see how the logic stream works. I mean, you can, and they build it that way so that when the agitators come in, they can go right to that. So, can you do whatever you want? Isn't that what liberty is? Can you go downtown? Well, you don't have a car because you don't have any money. So obviously money equals liberty. And that's the corruption of the decision-making process, is that we have come to equate money to freedom. So all you have to do is point to your wallet, your bank account, and say, I got no cash. So obviously I'm being oppressed. And I'm not saying poverty is not something that can be ignored. No, I'm probably one of the rare ones that say poverty should be one of the most important things that we talk about. And yes, it does tie into the southern border and what's going on there, because the more folks come across here who aren't citizens, who will taint a marketplace by being off the books or under the table, working for less than even the median wage of an industry, because they don't have the recourse, nor do they really, in some cases, have the idea that they could have recourse if somebody was abusing their labors. And the American business class that suborns that kind of corruption does it because they see cheap labor rather than, a cheapening of society. They don't see the impact on their customer base. They just see that they can provide a product cheaper. And I use that word rather than less expensive. But that is poverty as well. So poverty is an issue through all of it, everywhere you go. And so the idea that being poor is the same as being oppressed is just like the way the cunning linguists twist the word homelessness and make it unhoused. Because the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, implication is that it's somebody else's position to fix that. And that's what we have to get away from. I mean, if we're going to pull the plane up before we make it all the way to the crash site, we have to go back to realizing that it's on us. And you have moments like where Eric Adams says we have outside agitators manipulating our children. Well, Eric, yeah. And let me show you all the other places you have them. And like we had the story of the NGO that comes in and teaches or holds developmental trainings for Albemarle County's school teachers and then says, but don't tell the parents. Because they can, because unless somebody whistleblows from one of these events, you'd never know. You could ask and they'd say, well, that's proprietary information for a company that's not subject to FOIA. Oh, funny how they did that. Jim is saying, speaking of freedom, have you heard about the vote on May 27th on a treaty with the World Health Organization? That's the World Health Organization treaty where we all basically cede our authority. We can get into that, Jim. We have heard of it, but it wasn't on the docket here. But I appreciate the text in on the YouTube channel. But that will fit in nicely with several other things that are going on, because it's all about creating an authoritarian group. And here is the problem, is that we too frequently accept that because the gaslighters will tell us that the world is too complicated for you to have any dominion over yourselves. Oh my gosh. And you add AI and some of these other fanciful things that sound like they're ripped from a Heinlein or Asimov novel, and you say, gosh, we need somebody in control over all this. And then they win. That's all they want. They want you to say, yeah, I really don't think I'm capable of doing this. Because it's the only way a free people give up their sovereignty.
This is the Racing Wire Minute with Brian Belansky.
The bombshell heard around F1. That story next.
The Racing Wire Minute is presented by
She can stand, she can do more. Like build a rocket and watch it soar. Clean the oceans and make the world a better place. Oh, she can STEM.
Learn more at She Can STEM. A message brought to you by the Ad Council.
F1 insiders say Adrian Newey is largely responsible for a lot of the success Red Bull Racing has had over the years. He's been with the team since 2006, and he designed cars that won 7 Drivers' Championships and 6 Constructors' titles. While Newey's exit from Red Bull has been rumored for weeks, I don't think many really thought he'd do it. Well, he's done it. The team announced Wednesday Newey is departing at the end of 2024. There's still no word about what his future plans are. Every team would love to have him, only a few can afford him. And there's always the chance the 65-year-old Brit could retire.
Your Thursday forecast, a hot one, sunny skies, afternoon highs around 91 with a light southerly wind. On Thursday night, mostly clear, lows in the lower 60s. Friday, increasing clouds, still warm though, afternoon highs in the upper 80s. Friday night, chance of showers and storms, mostly cloudy with a low of 58. On Saturday, cooler, mostly cloudy, chance of showers and storms, a high of 66. From BlueRidgeLife.com, I'm forecaster Tommy Stafford. Now, back to Joe Thomas in the morning.
Joe Thomas in the morning, and so the press is corrupt, and I say this because I'm in here with them, and I can see, and they show the the interest in pressing an issue, in pushing hard and asking tough questions when somebody isn't speaking to their narrative. Aaron Burnett, for the example, on CNN, was pressing my classmate, Eric Adams, Bayside High School, 1981, over the idea and his statements about outside agitators in the protests at Columbia University. And she said, do you have any evidence of this? All of a sudden, the press is interested in evidence and that kind of thing. He said, we have clear evidence. But she said, well, how many? She wanted to know how many of these students were being, as if, one wasn't sufficient. I mean, well, the Nazis weren't so bad because it was really only one or two of them. I mean, if it was a lot more people, Hitler and Goebbels, the influence was really limited because it was just a couple of guys. He said there is clear evidence of outside agitators working with the Columbia University students to start these anti-Israel, pro-Hamas protests. And it's interesting to watch these news reporters like Aaron Burnett, who all of a sudden realize, oh, I can ask questions, but only when the story doesn't fit their tidy little narrative. So let's go back to Louisa County, pulling funds from Piedmont, Virginia Community College. They decided to do that at last night's Board of Supervisors meeting, and they did so over programs that they pointed to at Piedmont, Virginia Community College over a pro-Hamas slant in the student activities. There was a film screening with Students for Justice in Palestine. At their meeting, the supervisors passed a resolution suspending funding from the County of Louisa for fiscal year 2025 for Piedmont, Virginia Community College until they get an in-person explanation on the college's stance on discrimination. The college has We better check this. Can we check the YouTube? Apparently there was just a disconnection, a temporary cessation. We were saying bad things. We may have to go back in. Somebody check the YouTube channel in here and make sure we're still streaming, because this happened to us once before at about this very same time. Can somebody call Firefly and say, don't do that again? Let's see if we're still live in there, and if we are, if not, it says we are still live, so that's a good size. Yep, there we are. We're still going. So whatever it was, we stayed connected to YouTube. So anyway, back to the point. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure people were aware. I got a flag that said that the connection went down with YouTube, and somebody check the Rumble for me as well. But back to the issue over these pro-Hamas protesters and this slant where, and as I think the Louisa supervisor's point was, that there were no film screenings on what it's like to be an Israeli. And so all of this, whether it's Eric Adams and his outside agitators, the outside agitators that hold film screenings at Piedmont Virginia Community College, the issue is at the center square: oppression. That's the seed that these groups are using. The seed that they plant is that you're oppressed, and then they do it by saying, well, you don't have any money, and the Palestinians don't have any money. So let's go to the question. Let's instead of Aaron Burnett playing investigator, let's dig in on the idea of this Palestinian oppression. Gary from Berlin, New Hampshire says, we're good in Utah. I guess you're traveling, Gary. Stephen says, waves and says we're good. Tommy also says we're back. That's all on Facebook. I'm hoping YouTube, that's all on YouTube. I'm hoping the Rumble is connected as well, and I will check that when we get into our news break. But the idea of oppression. So first off, it's a con to say just being poor oppresses you. It's the same faulty logic that leads 20-somethings to say, it's not what you know, it's who you know. That abdication of personal responsibility, that my lot in life has somehow been set up by someone else. And they pitch this so that you don't realize that if, and we're just going to take this leap of faith, we're going to take this leap of faith, if you follow their rabbit hole, that poverty is oppression, who's oppressing the Palestinians? Is it Israel? A country where more Palestinians have work than in the Gaza Strip? And I hear the people already saying, but Palestinian as a race, we're just accepting their political jurisdiction as members of this Palestinian authority. But who, under the phrase authority, who is it that is actually then oppressing the Palestinians? Because these kids are all being told by Eric Adams' outside agitators that they're being oppressed by Israel and, in abstract, the United States and Western civilization in general. They're being oppressed by those people because they have nothing. They have nothing because the West wants them to have nothing. So what do you say to that? If you're actually digging in, the question has to be, who is causing this poverty? The Palestinian authorities will say it's Israel that's causing the authority, yet we have provable instances time and time again of people sending bags and bags of money that instead of being used to build agriculture and irrigation and greenhouses and ways to get water to places so you can grow, they were digging tunnels so that they could get past the borders into Israel. And then they'll point to Israel's agriculture and say, see, they're oppressing us. They're not letting us have their stuff. That's the key to the Eastern Marxists' view of the Western liberties. And believe me, there's too many people in the West who are done with liberty, because as with the groups like Jews for Palestine, there's this appeasement mindset that says if we just give them what they want, they'll leave us alone. They won't be upset with us. And that's not true. It's never ever been true. I challenge you at 434-882-4217. Call me. Oh, by the way, we fixed the voicemail on there, so now you at least know what you're doing when you call in to that number, and leave your comment on that. But has there ever been an instance where that's been true? Emails to jtinthemorningradio@gmail.com, or if you're watching on YouTube, I know there's a Rumble messaging system as well. We just the way this is set up, we see the monitoring of the YouTube channel pass. You can join in either of those ways, but the question needs to be, if you believe, not F you, but if you believe that they're the ones chanting F you. If you believe that canceling classes at the University of California, Los Angeles, or damaging millions of dollars worth of property at Columbia University in New York, or breaking University of Virginia law by still being there this morning, is to fight an oppression. Who is doing the oppressing? The outside agitators that my classmate Eric Adams talks about will tell these kids, these skulls full of mush they used to be called, but impressionable, as young people don't have the yardsticks, the hatch marks on their gun belt, if you will, to look at it and say, hold on a second here, this sounds familiar, this bovine excrement sounds familiar. And the more experienced you are, the more we need to be the ones who are saying, no, who is doing the oppressing? Because the oppressing is being done by other Palestinians. Because this is, and not to belabor this, but Saddam Hussein, not to make an excuse, but it was one of the reasons that Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq was so brutal, was that there were sects of Muslims in Iraq who would kill one another based on how they followed the Quran. And then they'll turn around and tell you, oh, well, that's not, they won't do that to you. They don't do that to each other.
Your Thursday forecast, a hot one, sunny skies, afternoon highs around 91 with a light southerly wind. On Thursday night, mostly clear, lows in the lower 60s. Friday, increasing clouds, still warm though, afternoon highs in the upper 80s. Friday night, chance of showers and storms, mostly cloudy with a low of 58. On Saturday, cooler, mostly cloudy, chance of showers and storms, a high of 66. From BlueRidgeLife.com, I'm forecaster Tommy Stafford. Now, back to Joe Thomas in the morning.
Thomas on this Thursday morning, and I just got a heads up, and we checked ourselves. Rumble is still doing its thing as well. So whatever that momentary loss was, apparently it wasn't extended enough to even trigger YouTube, which is good because it's a mess. You have to start a whole new program, and it's just it's not as simple as you would think, so I appreciate that. Gary in, I guess, Utah this morning said, Jews for Palestine sounds like women for the Boston Strangler. It is, but that's the success of the gaslighting, the guilt trip that Americans have been fed for decades. This isn't... Valerie Jarrett did not invent this during this administration. She rolled it out really starting in 2009, the idea that Americans' prosperity is dirty, is tainted. And that begins, that's the seed of this during the Barack Obama administration. The seed was planted that being prosperous was bad. And that's communism, is that communism takes a more harsh view of it. It's criminal to be prosperous over other members of the community. And one of the places these authoritarians, since Jim brought it up, is the World Health Organization. And we've talked about how the authoritarians will use various things to gaslight us into giving our God-given rights away to them. And one of them is fear and loathing in The Hague. So Jim was asking about the World Health Organization. The world leaders are ready to sit back down on working on the next phase of the Global Pandemic Treaty. I bring this up because Epoch Times has a wonderful piece that if you go to epochtimes.com, that says the CDC knew that the clot shots were, well, the clot shots, and that there was a significant health risk from taking these experimental vaccination shots. And so as we gather later this month to try to, again, come up with some global pandemic response, and remember, you give up your liberties because health, because galactic global health emergency. Senator Binks from Tatooine is about to vote to give the Emperor extreme and complete power. I know it's not May the 4th yet, but we just like to get ahead of the game by using some Star Wars allusions. So before Senator Binks goes to meet with the other world leaders at the Galactic Summit to give the Emperor complete dictatorial control to protect the Empire at this World Health Organization, understand that this pandemic treaty it supersedes your authority. And what it's designed to do, and this is an important issue for our Senate candidates, because technically, though evidence to the contrary has been offered, especially as the Paris Climate Accords, for example, has never been even brought up to be voted on by the U.S. Senate, supposedly a deliberative body designed to oversee our international entanglements, to use George Washington's phrase. So this global health organization, which is already, time and time again, let me read to you from the Epoch Times report, Zachary Stieber reporting, U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention officials found evidence that the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna COVID-19 vaccines to deaths. CDC employees worked to track down information on reported post-vaccination deaths and learned that myocarditis, or heart inflammation, a confirmed side effect of the vaccines, even by their own manufacturers, was listed on death certificates and autopsies for some deaths, according to an internal file obtained by the Epoch Times. A CDC spokesperson then queried about why the CDC didn't take into account autopsies or death certificates, was told that they aren't considered evidence of casualty. So as we go to join in, when we go to join in this World Health Organization summit later this month, to continue negotiations at ceding our national authority to this health organization, I think it's important to note, again, not yelling fire in a crowded theater, but just doing what a journalist is supposed to do and say, anyone else smell smoke? But by doing that in our modern gaslit world, simply saying, anyone else smell smoke? You're told, and we've been told for, 4 years now, that there's nothing to see here, move on. Yet we discover now the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, in their analysis of the safety of a health product or healthcare treatment product, you name it, whatever they have to give the authority to, is dodgy because they won't take into account death certificates and autopsy reports. Seems like there was a point in human history where that was the only kind of medical data you could get. The issue isn't whether we want to be unsafe or we want to be coughing up loogies on each other's glasses and spreading disease willy-nilly, although you're probably going to say I'm being unfair about this. These are the same folks who seem to be okay with people having unprotected Congress, lowercase c, and making allowances that should a baby be the outcome of that Congress, there are medical treatments for alleviating that side effect of the unprotected Congress. But there are other things involved in unprotected Congress, isn't there? There are other viral infections. So why isn't the Center for Disease Control and Protection so adamant about protecting us from the uncontrolled, unshielded spread of those viral seeds? Just a curiosity. Just another one of those questions you're supposed to ask. Anyone else smell smoke? The CDC spokeswoman in the Epoch Times report says, when presented with a file of dozens of questions about it, said that, quote, determining a person's cause of death is done by certifying official physician, medical examiner, or coroner who completes the death certificate. The spokeswoman declined to explain why the CDC doesn't consider autopsies or death certificates as evidence of casualty, the criteria that would establish what caused a death, or whether the numbers have been updated since 2023. She also declined to answer questions about specific deaths outlined in the file, citing privacy and confidentiality. And this is the most laughable part about this Epoch Times report, is these are the same folks who wanted you to get, I don't have a clot shot card, so I can't show you, but take one of these. So they want you to have a card that will tell officials if you've had some medical treatment. But when you ask them what their criteria are for determining what is a dangerous health concern, they tell you you can't know that. But they can know whether you've taken some experimental procedure. also, regardless of the curiosities over HIPAA, but these are the same folks who went to court and said the government has no right to know whether somebody had unprotected Congress and is now trying to end the biological outcome of that unprotected Congress, where they spread some droplets without wearing a mask. And now there's an infection in the woman's womb that a doctor wants to treat and get rid of. But you can't know that. But we can know whether you've taken a shot or not, because you're going to have to walk around with your card saying, look, I've got a shot. And then years after the fact, when it's found out that they knew that these things were dangerous, they say, well, but that's privacy concerns. And they say the greater good. And they point to the fact that we're not worried about COVID-19 anymore. These are all the things that are in what becomes of a society when people say, hey, does anyone smell smoke, is immediately cast out as somebody yelling fire in a crowded theater. And I know I beat that sawhorse up a bit, but it is one of the classic tropes that's used to silence speech under the idea of understanding speech. Now, the First Amendment does absolutely protect your right to yell fire in a crowded theater. It also, our government system, will provide punishments for you should you be lying, should you be inciting a riot. But if there is a fire in a crowded theater, and you were in that crowded theater, wouldn't you want somebody to say, hey, there's a fire over here? Rather than saying, ooh, I better not say anything because, you can't yell fire. So, Jim, to answer your question, the World Health Organization and all the contributory countries are getting back together later this month to restart the buildup of this global pandemic treaty. And if you ask, of course, be prepared. You will be accused of yelling fire in a crowded theater. And Jim just wrote his head anyway. But a congressman can pull a fire alarm in the U.S. House of Representatives without consequences.
Your Thursday forecast, a hot one, sunny skies, afternoon highs around 91 with a light southerly wind. On Thursday night, mostly clear, lows in the lower 60s. Friday, increasing clouds, still warm though, afternoon highs in the upper 80s. Friday night, chance of showers and storms, mostly cloudy with a low of 58. On Saturday, cooler, mostly cloudy, chance of showers and storms, a high of 66. From BlueRidgeLife.com, I'm forecaster Tommy Stafford. Now, back to Joe Thomas in the morning.
Joe Thomas in the morning. Thank you for tuning in and joining in. Rumble or YouTube, we've had another glitch, but it seems like it didn't last long enough to interrupt the feeds as well. So I appreciate that. Let's jump to another place where the authoritarians will rear their ugly head. Earlier, in one of the earliest iterations of this program, we got into a conversation about firearms and ammunition especially, and the places that you could find ammunition. And somebody pointed out that there was a family business that was selling ammunition in the area near the former Gander Mountain location in Albemarle County. Unfortunately, we may have alerted the authorities to their existence because an email was sent out to several of our participants saying, hey, we're real sorry, but our Albemarle County location was shut down by the county. We cannot sell on Gander Drive anymore, which is unfortunate because it was our most popular selling location. The property owner got a complaint from someone, evidently with a lot of influence in Albemarle County. We had to meet with county officials on site to get approval for the specific location. The property owner had to modify the site plan and get rezoned for the parcel, which we had to get another business permit and an explosive permits from the fire marshal. We are waiting on county officials to finalize their review, but they are right now not selling in the county, but they are apparently still out there by Domino's Pizza in northern Albemarle County. But it's, that whether or not that stands around for a long time as well. At least conservatives, Charles writes in, the participant that got this, can go to First Free Coffee and be able to avail themselves of his services there. But this is what the regulatory capture is. This is part and parcel of why they do it. Why do they do it? So they can keep you from doing things they don't want you to do. And there is, like with the CDC, where there is evidence, there is no evidence that somebody selling ammunition out of a truck is connected to violent crime, because that's generally not where people are buying their stuff from. Not the criminals, anyway, who are committing the crimes. I want to jump to that. So we brought up the CDC. Now the EPA. Chris Horner, great jurist, best-selling author of Climate Change, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming, the Power Grab, which is one of the great ones because it really lays out linearly why they are doing the things they do with climate change and the other next pandemics. Because remember, the World Health Organization wants to have a pandemic treaty based on what could be a global health emergency. There are two things that are currently in the home stretch trying to become the next global health emergency. The first being gun violence, the second being man-made climate change. So these are important to both of these stories. Chris points out that their finalized suite of rules governing electricity providers, that air, soil, and water regulations, tools to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Soon after the EPA announced this plan, the U.S. Supreme Court in West Virginia versus EPA struck down the Clean Power Plan. But that doesn't mean they don't continue to go on with their agenda. But as Chris writes in his piece, they won't hold up in court. And unfortunately, the authoritarians use this, just like the Albemarle County authoritarians, where, by the way, I wonder if the county officials realize that they could probably be charging their higher personal property tax rates on the ammunition that they've stopped people from selling. But because your taxes are much higher and your freedoms and your transparencies are much lower this morning in Albemarle County. But by the same token, what's happening to the guys who are selling the ammunition in Albemarle County is what they're doing to the power plants. So they're saying to Dominion, yeah, that's the Supreme Court now, but you better continue to shut down these plants, because once we get out from under this Supreme Court ruling, we're coming after you again. And by the way, we're going to use the dissenting opinions in the Supreme Court ruling to come after you with new pitches that we learned based on the Kagan and Sotomayor and those. But this will, come the end of May, perhaps be the next global health emergency that will allow the World Health Organization, if we don't fix it, if we don't stop it, from coming into our country and co-opting our law enforcement and our healthcare system and our public safety officials in order to enforce international law. And you may say to yourself, well, hold on a second here. I remember there was something in the U.S. Declaration of Independence about the King of England's abuses and usurpations, and one of them was he had made us beholden to laws that were foreign to our land. It was the very premise of one of the things that we were being held to account for things that we had no say over. You say, but Joe, climate change. Didn't you watch the news, Joe? This is the hottest summer on record. Following up last year's hottest summer on record. Notice those stories only come when it's 95 degrees on May 1st. They want the population control, and I was talking to a fella at the Conservative Political Action Conference earlier this year who wants to try to change the narrative. And it's very hard, and sometimes people like me might say, that's a good idea. The climate agenda, the World Health Organization agenda, all of this is a depopulation movement. And the only people who are complying with the depopulation movement are the Western states, the Britons, the Germans, the United States. We're the only ones who are depopulating ourselves. The people from Marxist countries are breeding like rabbits and coming in thinking, the Marxist countries paid for my health care, they paid for, and they supposedly kept me safe. These are the battle lines, and this would go all the way back to the silly kids on the campuses, like my classmate Eric Adams has finally come to the realization that these are kids who are being told by outside influences what to do, what to think. Well, Eric, now let's take the next step and eliminate them, and let's just go back to teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic in our New York City schools or any of the schools that have fallen prey to this. Because it's a battle versus East and West. Western civilization of freedom, self-actualization, personal responsibility, and an authoritarian East, whether it's wrapped in a burqa or just marching down the street in a military uniform. It is authoritarianism that takes away the individual's humanity. And that's the discussion, because most people, you tell them, say, hey, should people be subject to an authoritarian state? Many of them will say, well, people need to be helped. And then you say, okay, well, what about you? And they say, well, no, I'm doing okay. I don't need, but you can't, it's not an on-off switch. It's not concierge socialism. You can't have socialism for them and liberty for me in the same country. The country is either defending your God-given rights, and we'll get into this a little bit with Wayne Cruz later on in the program from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He's written a Bill of Rights for artificial intelligence, and it's great because what it does is it protects artificial intelligence from the government, which is what the original Bill of Rights did, to protect us from the government. And that's what a free society has to have, is it has to have a governing structure that's based on negative authority, where the government's ability to do things to its citizens is limited. And when we watch these protesters, to bring it full circle around, the oppressed, is it bad that people are poor and don't have enough to eat? Yes. Are there fixes for it? Faster than you can say Milton Friedman there are. Are we employing any of them? No, because it takes away the authority of the podium jockey. The podium jockey is the one who's out there saying, I will fix this so it never happens again. And that has to be clamped down on. Gary says there's nothing to it. Just ask the dinosaurs that used to live in Alaska. Right? Because there wouldn't be all that oil up in Alaska if there wasn't at some point. And where was the World Health Organization then? But that's what they do. They come with the plausible. And when you say, hold on a second, what are you basing that on? You're accused of misinformation. And that's the real crazy gaslit place we are. The pursuit of information has become synonymous with spreading disinformation. By simply saying, hey, does anyone else smell smoke? You're cast out, you're tossed out of the movie theater, to torture the metaphor once more. You're tossed out of the movie theater because you violated your ticket holder's responsibilities by questioning the authority of the movie theater owner. The movie theater owner is going to keep you safe until they don't. And that's where you need to have the intellectual curiosity to say, anyone else smell smoke?
Your Thursday forecast, a hot one, sunny skies, afternoon highs around 91 with a light southerly wind. On Thursday night, mostly clear, lows in the lower 60s. Friday, increasing clouds, still warm though, afternoon highs in the upper 80s. Friday night, chance of showers and storms, mostly cloudy with a low of 58. On Saturday, cooler, mostly cloudy, chance of showers and storms, a high of 66. From BlueRidgeLife.com, I'm forecaster Tommy Stafford. Now, back to Joe Thomas in the morning.
Thomas in the morning, and thank you for tuning in. YouTube, Rumble, and soon coming back to broadcast airwaves. across the fruited plain, and we'll have a smartphone app. We're working on developing a smartphone app for it. We'll be streaming as well. Joining us from the campaign trail, a fellow I met just last week. Apologies for not being on sooner, but we have a big race in Virginia's 7th Congressional District as Abigail Spanberger, the incumbent, is going to not run for re-election. So there's a wild scramble on both political parties' side to find out who will the nominees be to run for this open seat in Congress in November. And one of the folks who would like to be the Republican nominee for that is John Prabhudoss. Prabhudoss, and I'm sorry, I did it right at the forum the other day, John, but I think I missed it.
Yes.
How are you doing, sir?
Good, Joe. Thanks for that. Good to see you again. Thank you for having me on your show.
No, not at all.
It's always good to take any opportunities to talk about our campaign and what we believe in and how to reach our voters. And
during the forum, you talked about being a leader in building a coalition, and I see that you're a leader of a faith-based group, a Christian group of business leaders. Talk about, I don't want to use the phrase herding cats because I don't want to offend the cat lovers out there, but talk about how you bring people with, in some cases, the exact same idea on something, just a different way of approaching it together to get to a consensus.
That's right. I have, excuse me, I have all my life, almost 35 years in Washington, D.C. And Joe, I have dealt with people from different persuasions, not only religious, but also political, social, different kinds of. One thing that I noticed that everybody has something in common, something they care about. Even the extreme opposite, people who can't stand each other, will also sometimes, you need the niche is to find that particular thing and expand on it, make both sides that understand that you are not there to criticize them or to blame them, but rather work with them, and the humanity prevails. I mean, they come around, they understand it, and that's how we build the coalitions. I mean, for example, like you mentioned, this group that we have, that I have been fortunate enough to be a part of its founding in year 2000 in Washington, is a Christian group, but it's a very simplistic way of saying that it's a Christian group. It has Orthodox Christians, Latin Rite Catholics, you have Protestants, Pentecostals, you have Adventists, you have Baptists, Episcopalians, and all these people may not necessarily agree theologically. Even now, when some theological conversations come up, I remind them, guys, we are not going to solve this problem now. We need to focus on what we all came together for, and that keeps the focus and that keeps the coalition together. Otherwise, it's very hard to maintain a diverse coalition. And that's the religious background of that group is only the tipping point. Right. You have language groups, you have political affiliations, and they don't agree on 100 different things. But that's not the focus.
We were having this discussion to a degree in an abstract in this part of the program yesterday with former Congressman Tom Garrett, now in the Virginia House of Delegates. We were talking about ways to listen to people, way to think. But one of my points and one of my sticking points is there are people out there who want to hold dominion over one another. And I think that has to be a sticking point. If you want to have a difference of opinion with me is fine, but if you want to therefore then render my opinion moot and that I have to adopt your opinion on something, whether it be legislation or regulation or how I should live my life, I think that's an anathema to the American experience, don't you, John? And that's
absolutely
a bridge too far, right?
Yes, no, absolutely, you're right. Because you, in any given subset of groups of people, you're going to find them. They're going to be I would even say 5 to 7, maybe even 10% of the people that just adamantly don't want to work. I mean, if you look at their personality, they're not a people. Most of the time they turn out to be not people person, right?
Right.
I mean, there is my way or highway, and you agree with me. Otherwise, I'm not going to. I don't care what you have to say. And if they have that kind of a closed mindset, and unfortunately, we have that in Washington also with members of Congress, quite a few of them who actually have that mindset. In extreme cases, you can see on both sides. You can see that they are unwilling to compromise, but they are a small group. They do matter because they are noisy. But generally speaking, you have what you need is a majority of people that want to agree with you. The majority of the people can see a common good for the people, and that's what matters, and that's where we need to be effective and putting our efforts and focus on.
We just had one of our, and I believe it's one of the counties in the 7th Congressional District, Louisa County, has taken back and canceled funding that they were going to send to Piedmont, Virginia Community College over a Justice for Palestine event that went on at PVCC, I guess without counterpoint or any viewpoint regarding Israel or its existence and the struggles there. And, I know that there has been calls for congressional restriction on federal funds to these universities like UCLA and Columbia, and now we see them at Virginia Tech and Virginia as well. What should Congressman John Prabhudoss want to do regarding that kind of funding? Should this still be an issue if you take office in January?
Well, that's a very good question, Joe. The educational institutions should be supported by the government. Yeah, education is very important, but sometimes the fundamental problem that we are having is several generations of our students from kindergarten up to college level have been indoctrinated. Mm-hmm. And the faculty have gone to one extreme situation, with ideologies and what they think about social values and political. So that is the problem. This is if we have a balance among the faculty, and if the students are not indoctrinated to an extent that we have now, that we see today, mm-hmm. I think this may have been avoided. But your question is, how would we deal with it? The best way to deal with it is to understand where they come from, dialoguing with them, and see, this nation was built on certain values. Mm-hmm. And a lot of students, I see that in universities are aggressively recruiting students from foreign countries, mm-hmm. because a lot of students here graduating from high school are either not interested or unable, cannot afford to go to higher education, to colleges. So they're going to different countries, and that's the reaction that you see. Now, if you are looking at it, then how could American taxpayers support something that we don't agree with? It's a very tricky situation that we need to be very careful about how we are going to deal with it. Basically telling them, this is at a philosophical level. If you tell them, look, I don't agree with you, so I'm going to cut off, then we are no different from them, isn't it?
Well, and that's the philosophy, I guess, is part of it. People say that we should just be, point, counterpoint, campaigns. But I think, in the end of the day, for the next 2 years, you may be congressperson from the 7th District, and there are going to be a myriad of issues that come across your desk. So getting to know your philosophical side, I think, is important for voters as they head to the polls. Voting begins in this primary in 2 days.
Actually, tomorrow.
Actually, tomorrow, you're right. It's May 3rd. Too much Star Wars in my head. I keep thinking May the 4th. So you talk about your work in Washington. Talk a little bit about that before we have to go. What kind of work you were doing in Washington, and what does existing in the swamp as an outside force teach you before you go inside the swamp to try to legislate on behalf of the 7th Congressional District?
See, one of the things that I have for 30 some years when I dealt with members of Congress, I can see the gradual slide in the way in which people respond to, the elected members respond to a particular situation or an idea or a problem. Mm-hmm. And that is because now I understand this is a general trend that people are not willing to stand up for what they believe in. They don't need to legislate their belief, but they need to stand up, at least to acknowledge what they stand for. But that's where I think I can be. I always give this a quick example. In a situation where people are afraid of saying what they believe in, all it takes one guy to stand up and say, maybe believing in certain things or deciding in certain things is not a bad idea, then you will see people follow you. Right. People come together and say, oh, okay, he said it, so it's safe for me to say it. That's a situation that I see in many cases in Washington. There I can be very effective because I have done that for 30 some years in very critical, politically insensitive or not politically incorrect things that people are afraid of talking about. There I have done that. I have led the groups to work together, and this would be a great opportunity for us because you see this partisanship and bills are passed on a party line, which is not good for American people. We need to be able to converse with other sides. What's happening, people go to Washington with a predetermined ideas that they're going to join this caucus, that caucus, and they close the doors. They don't want to have a dialogue. They don't want to discuss. They don't want to try to convince other person, right? Mm-hmm. And that's happening more and more. That we need to stop. That's not a healthy way forward. I will be able to bring all people from all persuasions to come and reason, so we can promote America's agenda, what is important for people, what is important for a daily, small situations, whether it's the traffic gridlock on I-95 or whether it's inflation, whether it's, shipping our money to fight foreign wars, those kinds of things. So we can really have a reasonable conclusion on those things instead of just depending on party line vote to pass any bill.
From your lips to the chair of the Democratic Party's ear, John Prabhudoss, they're running for the GOP nomination. Yes, voting begins tomorrow morning and will run all the way through June 18th. Best of luck. Go out and shake the hands and kiss the babies. Don't get them mixed up. That was a bad scene for me once. But
I don't sniff. I don't sniff.
Yeah, no Joe Biden sniffings here. You have a great morning, sir, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
Your Thursday forecast, a hot one, sunny skies, afternoon highs around 91 with a light southerly wind. On Thursday night, mostly clear, lows in the lower 60s. Friday, increasing clouds, still warm though, afternoon highs in the upper 80s. Friday night, chance of showers and storms, mostly cloudy with a low of 58. On Saturday, cooler, mostly cloudy, chance of showers and storms, a high of 66. From BlueRidgeLife.com, I'm forecaster Tommy Stafford. Now, back to Joe Thomas in the morning.
Joe Thomas in the morning, and I don't know why this story came to me, and I felt like this story said Mac McDonald on it. All their more than 80,000 pounds of prosciutto have been recalled. Virginia is actually one of the states where this German-made prosciutto has been sold. So it's sold under the company name Consup North America, and the product was sold between September and March of this year, September of last year, and so please be careful if you, as we like to say, slice the bologna thin in this country. In this country, then
you're going a long way for this. You know this.
Well, you know that's where I go. I traveled a long way, but when I think of slicing the bologna thin, I definitely think of Mac McDonald. He has got his notebook.
I knew
open.
it was. Yeah. I knew there was something in there.
Well, that's it. You know, when we start to get into issues, and sometimes I'll hear the voice in my head saying, "Joe, you're slicing the bologna a little thin," and I start to think, yeah, and I like prosciutto. And
could be our new, with the change and transition, it could be your new mantra. Yes. Joe Thomas in Stanton now.
Slicing
Central
the bologna
Virginia,
thin.
Slicing the bologna thin.
That's right. Since 1981. I don't know, but
yes,
anyway.
That could be good. All right. A lot of little things, I guess. Short night for the number 11 Virginia baseball team. A seventh-inning walk-off home run to St. Navy, 10-0. Anthony Stefan drilled his first dinger of the year. It's the Who's 35th win of the year. The Ridgewood, New Jersey first year goes 3 for 4 in his first start since April 19th. Henry Godbout goes yard in the first, his 5th home run. The Wahoo's skip, Brian O'Connor, took time to praise his first year, Anthony Stefan.
It was great to see Anthony Stefan step up and have a big day. For me, it wasn't about the home run to finish the game. It was about the hustle double that he had when the infielder was in, the chopper that he hustled to second base. The guy plays the game the right way. Certainly was a spark for us, and he's a tremendous team leader.
I looked up some numbers. The Cavaliers have hit 84 home runs and scored 454 runs. That's an average of 9.6 a game.
Wow.
The open weekend for the Cavs with exams, back at it with George Washington next Wednesday, and the NC State series will start a week from tomorrow. A couple of other scribbles from the grounds. Lacrosse standout Connor Schellenberger, who has accomplished nothing in his life.
Yeah, no, what's he done?
Only every Player of the Year award ever and every record. Anyway, he and swimmer,
Mac taught him everything he knows, by the way. Mac McDonald taught him everything.
I just watched him when he was, knee high to a grasshopper. But he and Gretchen Walsh were honored as UVA's male and female athletes of the year. Of course, Gretchen, the outstanding swimmer. So that's the UVA. We used to have that banquet every year, I remember, and they still do. So the Virginia women's basketball team dipped into the portal and signed a former Tar Heel, Riley Gray, as a 6'3" forward, played as a true freshman in Chapel Hill. Barely. She logged time in only 5 games, 19 minutes, scored 7 points. She's from Pearland, Texas, and the former Houston Chronicle Player of the Year. And, of course, Coach Mock said simply she's a fit. Well, of course, Boston wraps up the series at home against the Heat. 34-point win is all. 118-84. Derek White at 25. The Mavs rout the Clippers and lead 3-2 in the series. 123-93. Luka had a cold, had a sprained knee, 35, 7 boards, 10 dimes, and, just moving on. The Yankees shut out the Orioles 2-0. We'll have more on that in a minute. The Nats run the Rangers and win 1-0. Trevor Williams and 4 relievers escaped 2 bases loaded, no out situations. It's the Nats' 3rd bagel of the year. Well, don't look now. They're 5.5 back of the Braves. What?
It wasn't Williams like the throw-in? He's been pitching like the ace of the team. He's got a 2-something ERA. They're like, he'll if he can hang around till the trade deadline, maybe we'll get something for him. It's like, dude.
Anyway, speaking of the Orioles, broadcaster Jim Palmer jumped all over umpire C.B. Buckner yesterday. Now, just a little backstory is that Palmer hates umpires. He's got 2 or 3 in his closet that he just brings out and just, I know he throws darts at them. He's got pictures of them on the wall, I'm sure. It just, there's something that happened along the way where Palmer just didn't like a couple of umpires. Anyway, here's Jim Palmer. First inning yesterday in the Yankees loss, okay, ripping C.B. Buckner.
Cortez drops the arm angle down, and here you go. C.B. Buckner strike zone, full effect.
Well, you kind of wonder how bad he's going to be, and he's shown us already in the first inning. This ball's a grounder. And, all you want is a guy that understands what the strike zone. That's on the ground. Shouldn't be umpiring, and he is. And they know it.
And they
Been
know
around
it.
a long time doesn't mean it's kind of like pitching. When I couldn't get people out, I became a broadcaster.
So there you go. I think he was pushing for CB to be an analyst now. Buckner has worked in both leagues since 2000. He has donned the blue in 2 All-Star games, 5 division series. But in a league survey 14 years ago, the MLB players voted Buckner the worst umpire in the league. Now, there's a trophy you want. You want to be voted the worst in your profession.
That's scary. Well, but here's I'm thinking, what a great, if I was running a sports talk station, what a great team. Never mind Mike and the Mad Dog. Hey, Mikey. Get a former pitcher and a former umpire and make them spend 3 hours together on the radio. There's your friction. I know you and Bud Foster do your Cavalier versus Hokie thing, but pitcher umpire, that's it, man.
No, that'd be perfect. It's funny you mentioned Mike and Mike. I had a few minutes yesterday. I was finishing up some paperwork, so naturally I have a TV in my office here. And I watched the Mike and Mike documentary again, the 30 for 30 Mike and Mike documentary, which is just terrific with Russo and Francesa and how they, got together and everything that happened in between in 19 years in New York and then separating and the whole. It's just really good. It's great insights with the program managers and this program director trying to put things together, trying to, keep love in the room and the whole 9 yards. But they were so dominant and so good for so long in New York that they tried all these other guys, Pete Franklin from Cleveland, and the New York fan knew right away that we have to have a New Yorker on the air. You can't, it's like in Iowa, if you're in Des Moines with a sports talk station, you're not going to bring a New York guy trying to be, a jerk.
Well, but at the same token, this was the thing. I never grasped what Russo's role was. He was opinionated, sure, without question. But the Francesa had been a reporter, and I guess his gravitas was that Bill Parcells liked him. He was like the one reporter Bill Parcells. Yeah,
he loved, and Russo was a little jealous of that. Which the documentary.
But I'm not sure that's like gravitas for a reporter. It's like, well, Bill Parcells likes him, so does that mean he's telling me what's actually happening with the football team, or is he telling me what Bill Parcells wants me to? That would be like.
Well, I'm a real, and I love the way you put that. I am a real Mad Dog guy because of his shtick, okay, and his knowledge. Now,
I like it better.
He went to Rollins College in Winter Park.
Oh,
okay.
I didn't know that. Well,
right in our backyard. His first sports job is in Jacksonville, Florida.
He does better with the TV thing he's doing, like the high heat or
whatever. It's really good. Yeah.
He's better.
But I'm telling you, he had a rant. No, he had a draft rant the other day that was priceless. So funny. When I'm laughing in my car driving home, it's you can tell. But he is so smart and so good and does his homework that's what. And then he had that edge on him in Jacksonville, and it didn't really work in Jacksonville. But he ripped a lot of people. He ripped collars. Oh, come on,
well.
But anyway, if you have a chance to see it again, if you haven't seen it, it's really good. Mike and Mike doc.
Hey, you've got a question coming in from our text line on the YouTube.
I love
feed.
it, really.
Jim wants to know, Mac, is it the umpires union the reason these guys are allowed to continue to keep calling balls and strikes?
Oh, I think so. But they, naturally they are reviewed a lot, but I think very often the union gets involved with a lot of stuff. We've seen it with the players union, and I think the umpires union is the same way. But they're looked at, they're scored, they're guarded. It's almost like up and down, not only Major League Baseball, but almost every sport. We were, Fred Barracat was a name that came out of the ACC who used to, monitor. And Fred was very popular among the ACC guys. And I mean, they would grades all the time. And then they would, coaches had to grade. And so a lot of those, and managers. So there's a lot of feedback with the leagues and a lot of grading and a lot of conversation going on for sure. I mean, somebody, as I said, 14 years ago, decided to put out a survey, and then Buckner got the lowest grades ever. So naturally the media ran with the story and said that he's been voted the worst, when they probably totally had boxes to check for a point total or whatever. But,
but that actually opens a double thought in my head. Again, going back to slicing the prosciutto very, very thin. That to be an umpire of something, you have to care about that thing. Dear friend, and I know you know Gary Grant, and I don't know if
very well.
Gary's watching or not right now, but I know sometimes he tunes in.
Love Gary.
Gary has been a soccer referee forever. As a matter of fact, I used to help him recruit soccer.
I remember that. Now that you say that, yeah.
And he did it because he loved soccer. And he wanted to make sure the game was played the right way. And maybe that's what we're losing, is these refs who are more about, not the game itself. Like, you want an umpire or you want a referee in football to want the game to be beautiful. And if somebody's breaking the rules of the game, then you want that to be punished, so that the beauty of the actual game, the same way I'd like to think of myself as an umpire of our public lives and our public discussions. It's because I love the country and I want the country to be the best that it is. I think you want the same thing out of an umpire, don't you?
Well, of course, because and Buckner, for example, is a former player. He played in college and had a cup of coffee.
No relation to Bill, is he?
No.
He let that one through his legs too, Bob. That's a
he's a Jamaican-born. He's a Jamaican-born umpire. But I mean, that's and you want people to be, and the biggest thing is consistent, and nothing has to be more consistent than the strike zone. And so when you hear Palmer going, "Oh, that's a grounder," that's a grounder, meaning from a pitcher standpoint, it's way out of the strike zone and low. So, but when you think about, and getting back to Gary Grant, I umpired, a couple of, like way back when, down at Grisham's Field, 9 and 10-year-old girls softball games. And you just love, moms and dads ripping you and yelling at you as you're working these 9 and 10-year-old games. It's like, what?
Well, but
we had a coach. 9-year-old softball. We had a coach he leaves the dugout and storms to the home plate to yell at it. I mean, what? I mean,
I guess, and I get a parent wants their kid to be successful, so you have to almost accept that. But the coaches have to, again, also be part of, like, hey, this is about the game, not this kid or whatever, and maybe now my Pandora's box is also opening yesterday's conversation about name, image, likeness, and the portal and all those other things.
We had a girl that was playing for a father. This was 9-year-old softball. I haven't thought about this in years. She was so scared to make a mistake. She sat in the dugout and cried, holding a teddy bear. That was my first experience coaching my daughter's team. And I see my daughter's, pictures. I have a lot of her softball pictures up, after she died a year ago. And I remember that episode, and I felt so bad for her that finally I had to pull the guy and say, just stop with the pressure.
Right.
Back off a little bit.
Yeah,
your daughter's a pretty good little athlete. Let her have fun.
Well, but that's the thing. I mean, you have to be able to achieve some more comments. Gary in Utah, normally of Berlin, New Hampshire, he writes, just by the way, that it is probably unions love to enforce affirmative action type policies. But then Greg writes in from Richmond, holy moly, another thing I didn't know, that the umpires have a union.
Everyone has a union except us.
Yeah, it's like red buttons. Didn't get a dinner, didn't get a union. Mac McDonald's doing sports forever doesn't get a union. Anyway, good stuff.
It's all good.
All right, you have a good.
It's all good.
And thank
All
you
right,
for
man.
everything as always.
No, we'll look forward to the weekend. I'll probably have a little bit of Tony Stewart for you tomorrow because he's on this weekend
Yeah, that's right.
with Foster and Friends. A wonderful visit. When Tony Stewart compares cars to bowling balls and tennis balls to explain G-force to me, you know we've got somebody special. So it's
Good stuff.
it's
All
pretty
right.
good. It's pretty good. All right, see you tomorrow, Bubba.
Your Thursday forecast, a hot one, sunny skies, afternoon highs around 91 with a light southerly wind. On Thursday night, mostly clear, lows in the lower 60s. Friday, increasing clouds, still warm though, afternoon highs in the upper 80s. Friday night, chance of showers and storms, mostly cloudy with a low of 58. On Saturday, cooler, mostly cloudy, chance of showers and storms, a high of 66. From BlueRidgeLife.com, I'm forecaster Tommy Stafford. Now, back to Joe Thomas in the morning.
Thomas in the morning. Thank you for letting us be of service to you wherever you may be this morning, so that these questions that are in some cases commonplace, in some cases should be commonplace, are armed with more than just whatever the narrative that you're being fed out of the website apps that you may follow in your news feeds there, that are certainly not being manipulated by the Chinese Communist Party, but maybe the U.S. government as well. Joining us now, one of our favorite people. He is the compiler every year of what he now tells me is the inartfully named 10,000 commandments, because they've gone way beyond that. So maybe it's the tens of thousand commandments, because just 10 were not enough for the U.S. government. He is the great Wayne Cruz from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. How you doing, Wayne? Good to see you again.
I'm doing great, Joe. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So before we get started, and we're going to talk about AI, but how bad is it? I mean, how much beyond 10,000 have we gotten?
It's quite bad. We've got the new report. Biden has, in the Federal Register this past year, issued over 90,000 pages, the second highest level ever. The rules in play are around 3,000, which is kind of typical, but the difference now is the rules that Biden is putting out are much bigger and fatter. So we're getting a much longer Federal Register with the same number of pages, like the tailpipe rule, smokestack rule, new Title IX changes. A lot of these things start out as guidance documents and they end up becoming rules after people screech and moan about them putting out these unaccountable guidance documents. So it's pretty rough. A lot of the big rules coming out, just so you know, Congress has an opportunity to veto them with the so-called Congressional Review Act. They can do a resolution of disapproval. A lot of those are on tap, but that's why you're seeing a big pour out of them from the Biden administration, because they need to get these in before the deadline in which a new president potentially could overturn them.
Well, and if you flood the zone, as they say, how many of these are actually going to get the scrutiny they deserve from
That's why they're doing it.
Congressional committees. We actually mention this frequently, and I think of you often when we bring it up. You're one of those people, honestly, I could probably call every morning for a segment on the program, and thank goodness I don't. But we bring you up frequently when we talk about the elected monarch of the United States and his Knights of the Round Table, his cabinet secretaries, with these regulatory powers, with these guidance documents, but on top of that, their own police departments beholden to them, and their own court systems in many cases beholden to them. And I mean, it's become a frightening scenario, which is how we wind up with these kind of blood sport presidential elections, because we want to see if our favorite candidate can pull the regulatory sword from the stone. Am I overstating the importance of getting these cabinet secretaries under control in their bureaucracies?
Oh, no, it's really important. One thing that's happened over the past few years is that in the wake of CARES Act, American Rescue Plan, Infrastructure Law, Inflation Act, Chips and Science Act, all of these tie into the AI stuff, by the way. A lot of them do. What has occurred is the spending itself in those bills, each of them are hundreds of billions of dollars. The spending itself is already hyper-regulatory before they write the first rule. So you could have EPA or FTC or FCC, OSHA, come out and write a big fat rule or a whole bunch of small rules, but the effect of all of this hyper-regulatory spending is the same. Federal government's growing. And what you'll find, it's happening with respect to broadband rollout, with respect to the chips and science rollout and the investment in chips, is all of these little add-ons. I just did a piece a couple days ago. I should talk to you about this too in another time, but it might be that a constitutional amendment banning these corporate subsidies, these grants and aid, will be the only way to reduce government, because what we're having is a fusion of business and government affecting all the issues we're talking about, from infrastructure to AI. So you have the administrators now capable, given this fusion of business and government, to say, oh, well, if you get this money, you can have it, but you're going to need to have this energy efficiency establishment in your building. You're going to need to have these childcare programs in place. And a lot of times, Joe, that stuff is not in the legislation at all. It's like it's not in the chips and science law, not in the inflation law. They're just using guidance documents to do it, or the notices of funding. We've got such a huge contracting state. Oh, by the way, this happens to be Small Business Week. The Biden administration was just talking about it yesterday. Yes. And by a Small Business Week, what they mean is we're giving a lot of loans out to small businesses that probably aren't efficient.
Well, but with strings attached, especially
yes.
to that.
So that's what's occurring. They can manifest this kind of whole of government progressive agenda on equity, climate crisis, and so forth with this fusion of business and government that we have. And they're cultivating it very carefully.
Well, and I ran into, bless their heart, a young lady I was talking to who was in defense of the administration. I gave her a lot of credit for just not trying to create some fanciful constitutional reason. She said, and I quote, "But we have to keep up with China, and that's how China does business."
Oh boy, if we believe, I often that always kind of drives me nuts with our movement, the liberty movement. If we think subsidies don't work and they make businesses be inefficient and horrible and lead to distortions and collapses, we should be encouraging China to do more, not emulating them. Make them keep doing subsidies so they destroy their own economy. Why would we emulate what we ostensibly think doesn't work? And there are a lot of reasons why it doesn't work,
Oh, and without question, because you're no longer first and foremost considering your customer, whoever that may be.
Customer's government.
Yeah, now and so you just got to make sure the right one gets elected. Wayne, so let's pivot. You mentioned AI, and you have some work now in the world of what should be our future with artificial intelligence, and it is frightening to me, like with the CHIPS Act. I spoke to Mark Warner, big fan of the CHIPS Act. I said, Mark, so what are we doing about the things that would be needed to make these chips that are illegal to mine in the United States? And he said, well, I'll have to look into, it's great. We can make this stuff. We just can't use the stuff we need to make. So talk about that kind of scenario as it comes to artificial intelligence. I want to start with the government's outward look at artificial intelligence, and then maybe in the next part we'll talk about what government wants to use AI for. But first, talk about the marketplace of artificial intelligence.
Well, it's been interesting, very interesting past few years, and even the advances in generative AI have even taken a lot of the experts by surprise, and so that's why you'll see the occasional story of such and so, who was one of the founders and godfathers of the artificial intelligence rise, is worried about massive harm coming from AI and calling for massive regulation. And I would joke that AI is not going to is merely going to kill us, not take our jobs. And I would be referencing, all the what really is taking place is all the military uses of it. But this is really interesting that AI is arising at this time. We had an internet 20 years ago, was uncensored, unfiltered. People could say what they want. Parents had to pay attention and keep the kids off and so forth. In the AI era, it has emerged in the wake of 2016 and all of the misinformation and disinformation and malinformation scenario. So if you look at some of the bubbling up proposals from the federal government, they all are highly regulatory, but they all want to address bias and misinformation and so forth. But here's the key thing I think to take away about AI regulation is one of the biggest players, for the reasons we just talked about a while ago, but one of the biggest players in the AI space is the federal government itself, in its research agenda and the money it's pouring out at universities, and even back in the Obama era through now, so-called infrastructure hubs, where government's pumping money out into this technology that's potentially risky. You and I have talked about it a lot on your show. And if we start Joe and Wayne's AI company, we have a lot of work to do in terms of assuring the public that what we do is safe. In a free market, you're potentially subject to strict liability. Any harm that emerges from AI, you are directly liable. We would have to post bonds. We would have to offer warranties. There are all kinds of assurances. This is why I say government regulation isn't regulation. You would have to make all sorts of assurances to use your technology. What government tends to do, and this happened with nuclear power, with Price-Anderson Act and limited liability for nuclear power plants, happened after the Patriot Act. If you make a defense security technology, you're limited from liability if it fails. What's happening with AI, before Biden did his executive order late last year that has all these requirements for government to so-called, supposedly protect privacy and all that, he had all of the AI leaders on stage with him in the White House, on the floor with him in the White House for photo ops, talking about a federal government blueprint for AI. And I'm like, smacking my head. And here are the titans of the industry standing there with the president nodding their heads. A lot of them defense contractors, a lot of them big contractors with the federal government. And the very same core issue I'd mentioned to you before about this fusion between business and government that ought to make small L libertarians and conservatives and even liberals very nervous. But instead of saying, wait a second, if it's incongruous, it doesn't make sense that the very entity that is trying to steer it and limit liabilities and set those standards is itself exempt for regulation. I thought, no, we have to step back and think about. And so I did a piece that you had contacted me about, but I said, Biden is fond of having all these bills of rights for everything, for passengers on airlines and things like that.
Because the original one is no good for them anymore.
Yeah, bills of rights are supposed to apply to our protections from the federal government. So I thought, while we're still at a relatively early stage in this, Congress hasn't passed a law yet. It's just the agencies who are pumping out regulations like chocolate bunnies and trying to do all of these guidance documents. We're at a point where Congress isn't going to do a bill this year. I don't see that occurring. I see some other things happening, but not an AI bill. It's the very important time to step back and say, wait a minute, what should an AI law do that regulates government? Not that regulates the private sector. If the government is worried about deep fakes and information copying and things like that, guess what? The private sector that serves us in banking, insurance, finance has an utter interest in security and trusted information online. It is the one who can solve the problem of deep fakes and so forth, not a regulation from Biden, which government regulation tends to make things worse. We always talk about, government regulation sets a floor. You meet that floor, you don't need to go above it because the government's protected you. You're indemnified. And I always joke that all tainted meat was approved by the USDA, so we don't
out to the grocery stores. So.
Right. So what I had just outlined briefly, and well, it was kind of a long article, but just kind of a bill of rights for AI in terms of protecting us from the government, and it involves things that should be obvious, I would think, but they're not, unfortunately, in the conservative movement that votes for things like the infrastructure law. But stop the government subsidies of companies who ought to be developing AI privately. Let them do it privately. Let them develop the security measures for it that naturally emerge in a free market rather than supersede those. That's kind of brief, but that's what I'm getting at. And you need to do things about privacy and surveillance because all of those are what government is using the technology for. And its ability to, in the innards of the internet, to kind of monitor information flows. Those are the kinds of things to block in a Bill of Rights.
Your Thursday forecast, a hot one, sunny skies, afternoon highs around 91 with a light southerly wind. On Thursday night, mostly clear, lows in the lower 60s. Friday, increasing clouds, still warm though, afternoon highs in the upper 80s. Friday night, chance of showers and storms, mostly cloudy with a low of 58. On Saturday, cooler, mostly cloudy, chance of showers and storms, a high of 66. From BlueRidgeLife.com, I'm forecaster Tommy Stafford. Now back to Joe Thomas in the morning.
Joe Thomas in the morning. Thank you for tuning in and joining in on everything. We're going to get some of your reactions to things coming up as well. But Wayne Cruz, Competitive Enterprise Institute, visiting with us on an AI Bill of Rights. Well, I think what you're just saying there is exactly why they want the subsidization nation. They want to be in bed. I remember Time Magazine, I think you and I have talked about this, the Time Magazine profile when Mark Zuckerberg was Person of the Year, and the PR puff piece that was being written by the reporters assigned to cover him talked about how in the midst of one of these deconstructed meetings in a room full of chintz pillows and foosball games, the head of the FBI poked his head in and said, "Hey, Mark, we'll be down in our office at the end of the hall." And the reporter showed zero intellectual curiosity as to why does the head of the FBI have an office here at Facebook? And that's the kind of thing I think you're talking about, is that by subsidizing it, then the government's like, hey, you took our money. It's like taking a loan from the mob. Once you've taken the money, you can't give it back. And you've now corrupted your whole process. And I think some of it sounds like almost like they're using the same premise that they're using for the 230 exemptions for these internet publishers to protect these AI generators, aren't they?
I think so. You mentioned that about the FBI and the involvement there, and the reporter not being curious about it. You see the same things with respect to, and I just heard this today. You might remember the Department of Homeland Security 2 years ago proposed the so-called disinformation board, and we quickly jumped on and attacked that. And this is like looking at information flows online. Well, it's an external threat, but you know what? Guess what? Now the terrorism we're worried about is homegrown, so we're turning this stuff inward. There was a big outcry. That office got dismantled, but this stuff never goes away. There was a Poindexter Total Information Awareness Office 20 years ago at the Pentagon with the triangle with the eye and knowledge is power and all those great quotes. Well, I just saw a clip today and haven't had a chance to read it, but the same woman who was heading the disinformation board is back in the game with some of this background stuff. But the reason this all matters is because the Biden administration, look, you know me, I have proposed abolishing antitrust and having companies get even larger as a replacement for this notion of public-private partnerships in everything now, from tap water to smart cities to space commercialization. Everything is business and government. That's not free enterprise. It's not capitalism. I propose rolling that back. I want companies to be bigger, but I also think it's not irrelevant that so many of the big tech companies who are proposing and supporting the Biden executive order and legislation on AI, it's not irrelevant that they are so deeply government contractors and that they do have satellite offices for FBI and so forth. But just for example, I hope you keep trumpeting this, because just for example, since Biden put out his executive order on artificial intelligence, there have been at least 3 major hearings in Congress on artificial intelligence, talking about the Biden order, talking about the new Office of Personnel Management, because they're going to have a huge effect too, talking about these different bodies that are going to have a role. But none of them are asking the questions, but wait, why should government be using this technology at all? The premise now, if you listen to those hearings, and I was a little bit shocked, and I was listening to the speakers in the hearings, and they would say, well, there's the government procurement law and the procurement of information technology, and that's why we have the ability to go. And I'll hear some in the movement say, well, obviously regulate fraud. That goes everywhere. But a certain law gives a certain bit of power for regulation of AI. And I think you got to be really careful, because these laws that regulate government procurement of information technologies, IT is not equivalent to what AI is now, to generative AI. And there's this notion of major questions. When something is a big enough dang deal, the Congress needs to pass a law rather than agencies presume they have law. But they're operating on the premise, Joe, that these prior pieces of legislation, some of them decades old, gives them authority to regulate AI. And since that's what they want. But since they're not going to do a bill this year, I think this is a time to really hit the brakes, roll back a little bit, and say, wait a minute, what should government be doing beyond picking a national bird? Make sure that, if government is doing a lot of, our founder, Fred Smith, would say, look, be careful of good government policies, be careful of goo-goo policies.
Yep.
If government is doing something, if you don't want taxes to be more efficient, because they'll collect more taxes.
Right.
Don't want to make government more efficient at doing things that it ought not to be doing. And so part of what we have to do is an inventory of government's role before we start pumping AI uses into the federal government or tolerating them.
I know this is going to sound sort of, caveman to a degree, Wayne, but I think you agree with me. Government's role, really, as I see it, is to establish what the punishments are should you violate someone else's rights.
Exactly.
And once you go beyond that, then you start playing in places where our own human proclivity to corruption is going to come in, and, oh, my brother-in-law has a company, or you talk about big companies getting bigger. What winds up happening, as you said, with these AI titans, they're all in with the government. So if Wayne and Joe started their own AI company, well, there would be probably a book full of regulations that were going to make it much more difficult for you and me to get started in that. Whereas if you got rid of all of that stuff, sure, there might be some big AI companies, but there'd be more room for little startups as well to nip at the heels.
Well, I think we need to protect that room for startups. In fact, I just saw another clip about the technology is becoming so capable, as you know, but the investments needed in network infrastructure to maintain it and to do all the churning and calculations, same with cybersecurity, huge investments that we ought to prefer in the liberty movement, that those investments be made by private companies with as little tie-in to the federal government and its proclivities as possible. That also makes the opportunity for the small businesses, like you're talking about, nipping at the heels, to emerge alongside, because you're not having kind of the rent-seeking model where businesses are lined up just like they were with Biden last July. It's been almost a year now, incredibly, but talking about these blueprints for artificial intelligence. But what Biden did with that is he then took, as they take liberties, he then issued his executive order with lots of requirements for agencies. They've all got to hire chief AI officers. That preceded the executive order, in fact, but it was reiterated there. Businesses now, private businesses now have to tell the government their plans and work out testing plans for their AI. That's not how things work. The way things work is you make sure that, or it should work, you want businesses to be regulated not just by a ridiculous filing a plan with the Commerce Department or something, but business suppliers, business customers, consumers, the media, Wall Street. The capital markets have an extraordinary role here in regulating. Insurance companies have an extraordinary role here in regulating. When you have government funding taint the process so much and remove the evolution of the technology and its uses, because part of creating wealth is creating the disciplines alongside that make it safe for everybody. More government is fusing in and say, well, you might screw that up, but we're the ones who told you to do this particular data collection. And by the way, as you collect this data, make sure you send it over to us at DHS, which, by the way, DHS just put its new guidance out last week on cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. So it's got new plans in the wake of its disinformation board. So it's fascinating to watch, but I'm just concerned that every time I watch one of these hearings, the emphasis is never, how do we restrict government? It's always restricting the private sector, when that's really not even what they're talking about. They're just protecting this fusion.
So your piece about the Bill of Rights, for AI's Bill of Rights, to protect it from the government, what are some of the highlights of it in the few minutes we
Yeah.
have left here,
Well,
Wayne?
it's really important. I think basically they've got to grapple with the investment question. I mean, I'm not a defense expert. I made the notion in there that, obviously there are going to be military uses of AI that this isn't relating to. But the main thing I'm concerned about is the fusion, the subsidies, the loan guarantees, the outpourings of hundreds of billions of dollars into private entities to develop AI when that needs to be done by the people. Also, if they are pursuing business private partnerships, one of the notions in there was, well, what's the alternative to that? The alternative to that is business doing it themselves and not being protected or indemnified. So that means tweak antitrust laws so that private companies can do these expansions and be held appropriately liable. Also, another plank of it was protecting free speech. Everything in the Biden executive order and so forth is aimed at targeting bias in AI. I suspect, and I had filed comments to OMB about this, they're not so much concerned about bias in AI as objectivity. So it's like legislation to say, well, you can't, you have to make loans that are economically unsound and things like that. That's the kind of bias they're talking about, where there's objectivity in credit markets and things like that. They want to use this regulation to go in and kind of advance equity policies and things of that sort. Also, there need to be in the Bill of Rights surveillance restrictions on the federal government. We just made reauthorization and things.
Wayne Cruz is on with us. We're losing our connection. Wayne, maybe AI has discovered, and Agent Smith is on his way to visit with you right now. I don't know if you can still hear us or not.
FISA and things like that. So we need to watch surveillance.
Now
I can hear you.
Now you can hear me. Like I said, Agent Smith will be at your door shortly, Wayne. But I appreciate it. CEI.org. Find the piece there. Travel well and safely, and we will talk to you again very soon. My mic off there. We're not done yet. Thank you for being there. A couple of comments. James Ski on the Rumble channel in our discussion with Mac regarding umpires and the unions. James Ski, I think, says it all. You get a union, you get a union, you get a union, everyone gets a union. At some point, isn't that what we see protesting right now? And our unions can then protest one another. And to that same subject, Bob and Esmont, in our conversation with John Prabhudoss, who's running for Virginia's 7th Congressional District. I only speak one language borderline well, but this phrase caught my ear. Our religious differences are just the tipping point. Are they the tipping point? I think the religious differences are where you run home to when all else fails. And the idea that somebody believes something different than you, and this goes back into the question we asked at the onset of the program, who is oppressing the Palestinians? Who is it that really is? If the Justice for Palestine movement, give them their nomenclature for a moment. If Justice for Palestine is seeking justice for Palestine, isn't the question really who's oppressing Palestine? And you look at some of the most brutal dictatorships in the Middle East, they have been basically to keep the Sunni and the Shia from killing one another. So who is it that's oppressing Palestine, really? Tomorrow, voting begins in Virginia's primaries. Lots of that to get covered, as well as Congressman Bob Good, who's on one of those ballots as well. We'll be checking in from Washington until tomorrow morning. Oh, and Scott Walter from the, I just had it in my head, Capital Research Center has got a new book about Arabella Capital, Arabella Advisors. If you want to know who George Soros is, this is George Soros. We'll get into all that with you tomorrow morning. Until then, so long, and thanks for all the fish.